Now, if you thought the FBI didn't fancy Prince Andrew very much, they are reportedly seeking to interview him, and he is more than reportedly, but actively seeking to avoid them. You should read what they had to say about Lord Louis Mountbatten, who came to, of course, a very tragic end, along with children and others, when the IRA blew up a boat that he was sailing off the coast of his estate in the Republic of Ireland. And no disrespect is intended to that disgraceful ending. But the lifetime of Mountbatten was seeded with the most loathsome corruption. The FBI warned the American government not to have anything to do with the man who was once the supreme commander of the Allied war effort in the Pacific. He was the last viceroy of India. He presided over the catastrophic division of India into two states, India and Pakistan. He was present in the 1970s, during the government of Harold Wilson, seditious discussions that centered on a military coup to overthrow the Labour government of Harold Wilson and put the very same Lord Louis Mountbatten in charge of a government of national unity, effectively a junta, overthrowing the elected government of Great Britain. He was a rum character, even on the basis of the books that I've read, some of them written by our next guest. I've even read his Stalin's Englishman, a wonderful book about Guy Burgess. He's a top literary agent and a top author, and his name is Andrew Lownie. Meet him now. Andrew, thank you very much for joining us. The proximate reason for this discussion is that you're trying to open up to the public information about Mountbatten that is being ruthlessly suppressed. Please tell us about it.
Well, that's right. There have been two official lives of Dickie and Edwina Mountbatten, and those lives quoted quite extensively from their diaries and letters. So when I began researching my book in 2015, I asked to see these letters and diaries. The whole collection of Mountbatten papers had been bought by the University of Southampton with public funds and under the acceptance and lieu scheme to be seen by the public for close to £5 million. And I was surprised, therefore, to find that they knew nothing about these diaries or letters. Well, eventually, after a 6-year fight through the tribunals, having put in numerous freedom of information requests and having had the Information Commissioner rule that these diaries and letters had been closed quite illegally and should be opened to me and to indeed any other person who wanted to see them. That decision was made in 2019, but the Cabinet Office, who somehow seemed to have got themselves involved in this, and Southampton University appealed, and we're still fighting to get these diaries and letters, which I think are an important source, revealed. Some material, after parliamentary pressure and media pressure, has been released, but there's still the diary, for example, for 1947, covering Indian independence, and the papers after 1960, which remain closed, and plus other gaps during the Second World War. It was almost an unprecedented occurrence in that Southampton University were actually charged with contempt of court by the Information Commissioner. They've now been basically fighting a very expensive legal battle to prevent me seeing this. It's cost me £250,000 in legal costs, and it must have cost them quite considerably more. But neither the Cabinet Office nor Southampton are prepared to say what their costs are. And I think this is a very important case, not just for historians having access to archives, but it's an example of the censorship of our history by those in power and the abuse of a government to prevent material which has been bought by public funds from being seen. In effect, 4.5 million was spent buying it, and another million probably has been spent stopping people seeing it.
What do you think it is they're trying to hide, Andrew?
Well, I wish I knew. I mean, from what I can see of the material I have read, it's all completely innocuous. So I can only imagine that what they've now kept back is where the juicy stuff is, or that they're simply seeking to make an example of someone to prevent anyone else in future trying to seek access to material. But what's very clear is that the royal household are involved in this. They've been going to meetings, they're copied into correspondence. And we know, for example, that one of the reasons the delays in sending some of this material into the archive was dealing with Prince Philip's death. So it just seems to me that we're living in a banana republic. We're not allowed to know our own history.
Alas, it's not a republic. The royal family are clearly, what other reason could Southampton University have, having expended millions of taxpayers' pounds on these archives, have for not allowing the public to see them, other than royal pressure?
Well, I think they're kowtowing exactly to government and royal pressure. One of the other scandals is that they're now admitting that no one had actually looked at this material before it was closed. The only person who'd seen it and who made the decision to close it was an archivist at Southampton, who then requested that he could edit the diary himself. And the Cabinet Office gave him that permission. But this diary was due to come out next year. But again, no one will say if this diary is going ahead or not. And indeed, parliamentary questions have been answered with lies. They either claim it's sub judice, which is the lie now, or they've said that there were undertakings given by Mountbatten in 1969 which allowed them to basically censor this material. But it was pointed out to them that these 1969 undertakings don't refer to individual diaries and private letters. They refer to government papers from his time as Chief of the Defence Staff. So time after time, they've told lies. When they're caught out, they just tell different lies.
Now, Mountbatten, as I know, not least from your own work, despite being a luminary of the state, could scarcely have been for people d'un certain age, like me. We were brought up to understand that Mountbatten, with the flashy television series about his life and so on, was some kind of a British hero. But that wasn't the whole story, was it?
No, I mean, he curated his legend, and you mentioned the 12-part series on the Life and Times. And again, his story was censored. One of the things I found in the course of researching my book, The Mountbattens, was the FBI file that you mentioned from 1943, talking about his penchant for young boys, and that he was a man of very low morals, they called him. I began to find more and more about this. I have a whole chapter about his paedophilia and his bisexuality, which of course was illegal at the time. He was sacking people from the Navy for the very offence that he was committing himself. And people in authority knew all about it. I mean, the extraordinary thing is that when he went to Malta and just after the war, his chauffeur was tasked by his superior officer, or former officer, to find out where the male brothel was in Malta, because he would want to go there. But I think the other shocking thing I discovered was when I asked for other FBI files relating to Mountbatten only a few years ago, I was told that they'd been destroyed. And when I asked when they'd been destroyed, I was told after I'd asked for them.
Well, has the benefit of being candid, that answer. To be called a person of low morals by J. Edgar Hoover must have meant his morals were really very low. In a way, in ordinary terms, that would be none of our business, except, as you say, some of his proclivities were actually illegal at the time, and he was drumming people out of the armed forces for crimes he was committing virtually on a daily basis. But as we no longer regard these things as crimes, depending on age, of course, and consent, it only really matters to us in historical terms, if it impinged on his military and political role, which it did in the case of India and the subsequent partition, didn't it?
Well, I mean, he, of course, was always open to blackmail. And indeed, I didn't use this material in the book, but there were suggestions from Russian KGB agents that he had been compromised. I have found no evidence to support that, so I didn't use it. But you say it doesn't matter, but, you know, there are victims still alive, still coming to terms with the abuse that they suffered from him. And there's still the cover-up. The Garda have admitted that they have the car logs for August 1977 when two of these boys I interviewed were abused, but they're refusing to release them on the grounds they are relevant to the 1979 murder inquiry. I think the other question is why his security was reduced in 1979 when the threat against him was heightened and he had been actually warned not to go to Ireland. But you come to the question of India. I think what these diaries may well show us is that he was far less impartial than he should have been as viceroy, and that Pakistan may well have good reason to feel that they were unjustly done by. So, you know, there are important
because of Mountbatten's wife, Lady Edwina's brazen affair, maybe even literally under the nose of Louis, with the Indian leader Nehru.
Yes, and I think the two questions are, when did the affair start? Did it start after the independence or before it? And I think all the evidence that I found suggested it began before, and also whether it was platonic, as the family claim, or a sexual relationship, which I believe. I think there's no doubt Mountbatten knew about the affair very early on, and he encouraged it. It suited his purposes as it suited Nehru's and Edwina's purposes. One of the other battles is to get released the literally hundreds of letters between Nehru and Edwina, written between 1947 and her death in 1960. Southampton are supposed to have exercised their option on those letters by the 5th of August this year, and yet they've made no statement about them. They've not been made publicly available, and they're not answering questions about that.
Now, to ask the famous question asked by Paul Daniels, asked of Paul Daniels' wife, what first attracted Lord Mountbatten to his frequent trips to Ireland? Because, as you say, on the face of it, a member of the British royal family, frequently holidaying in the Republic of Ireland when there was a war going on, would seem strange. I detect from things that you've written and things I've heard elsewhere that he was involved in very murky business indeed in Ireland.
Well, the family home that he inherited from his wife, who inherited from her relations, Classieborn, was where they went on holiday every year. But you're right, other members of the royal family were not allowed to go to the Republic. And he was warned on many occasions that he shouldn't go. There have been several attempts on his life before 1979. Indeed, there had been an attempt to put a bomb on his boat Shadow 5 the previous year, which is why not guarding it in 1979 seems extraordinary. But there have been rumors. I didn't put them in my book, but I heard a lot of stories that he didn't want much security in Classieborn because he wanted the freedom to be on holiday, but also, of course, the freedom to not be watched with his activities. And certainly the two stories that I recount of the abusing of these boys, who are now about 60, took place at Classieborn or nearby.
Could he have been involved in the Kincora boys scandal?
Well, there are lots of rumours about that, and there are various connections. One of the boys that I interviewed who was abused was in Kincora and was brought from there. He was certainly well known in Belfast. And again, these car logs would be useful evidence to see that if actually one of the wardens at Kincora or some member of staff there had driven this boy to Classieborn. But there's certainly lots of stories about boys being trafficked to some of the big houses in the area. There was a sort of extensive VIP abuse ring operating on the west coast of Ireland.
It makes Prince Andrew's alleged offences almost trivial by comparison, the indictment against Mountbatten. Let me move on to political terrain, if I may. One of the reasons I have a particular interest in this is I knew Harold Wilson. Harold Wilson was a friend of mine after he left office, I should say. The fact that a junta was envisaged by certain high personages in the land to supplant, overthrow the elected government of Harold Wilson is possibly the biggest scandal of them all. And yet, most British people know nothing about Mountbatten's alleged role in that.
Yes, well, I think it's understandable because most of the paperwork has been destroyed and the people who knew about it are dead and didn't really talk about it in their lifetime. But I was able, by triangulating the correspondence of various people involved, to discover that he was much more actively involved than he later claimed, that he was very flattered by the approaches. He actually put forward various candidates for this government of national unity, including the head of the Hammer horror films, Jimmy Carreras. And he was a man who would have liked to have been prime minister, who felt frustrated as a member of the royal family that he couldn't take on political power. So I agree, this is one of the unknown stories of the 60s and 70s. There were two periods, really, one in 68 and then one later in 1970, when various MI5 officers were involved. But unfortunately, all those who would know anything are dead, and I suspect the papers will never be released. But certainly the diaries and letters that I looked at in the papers of Mountbatten and also of Cecil King and Hugh Cudlip had all been heavily censored for that period. There are actually gaps for the key dates.
You're a historian, you're used to archives and so on. I suspect a lot of the people watching and listening to this now will wonder, well, these people would just destroy, especially in those days before computers and hard drives and so on, these people would just destroy inconvenient papers and evidence.
Of course, and that's one of the big problems that we historians have. But, documents the lifeblood of historians. It's the building blocks in which we reconstruct our picture of the past. And we have a Public Records Act which requires these papers to be preserved, not necessarily private papers, but public papers. And the governments of all persuasions over many years have not fulfilled their obligations under the Public Records Act. They are abusing the use of freedom of information exemptions. They are, of course, all the sensitive documents are always the ones that suffer from damp and asbestos. And we know from countless scandals, including the Mau Mau scandal, that they will lie and destroy files or keep them back when they've even been taught by the courts to bring them forward. So it's a really big problem for historians. But you're right, of course, people who will curate the story and they will destroy papers that reflect badly on them. But that's why we have a Public Records Act, that at least the public records have some accurate picture of the past.
Is that going to become worse in the electronic age now that papers effectively no longer exist? Is that going to make life even harder for historians?
Yes, it's much harder for all sorts of reasons. Tony Blair introduced sofa government, so instead of having civil servants taking minutes and records of things, it was all just casual chats, no records kept. And we have the problem of people using private emails. Michael Gove is notorious for it, and encrypted communications. So the records aren't being kept to start with, let alone being destroyed later. And it's very difficult. The Freedom of Information Act does cause problems because, of course, civil servants have to be able to give advice in confidence and not feel that in 20 years' time they're going to be in trouble for it. But we do have safeguards for that. But my worry is that the governments are hiding behind things like national security when there's no national security involved at all. It's just political embarrassment.
And what's the next stage then of your valiant battle for the right of the public to know? Where does this go now, the Southampton University matter?
Well, the hearing, which they've managed to kick down the road for 2 years, is finally being heard on the second week of November. We're expecting to win. They've actually now dropped many of the objections that they originally fought for 5 years, and they're no longer relying on those. And so we'll see what new excuses they come up with. But we're pretty confident of winning, and I'm pretty confident that I will get my costs. They're not normally given in a tribunal of this sort, but we've managed to produce pages of falsehoods that were given to us, and we think the judge will award costs in this case.